Welcome back to another new podcast from the Association for Materials Protection and Performance. Of course, we're best known by the shorthand acronym of AMP. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, news editor with the AMP publications team. In that role, I create content for both Coatings Pro magazine and Materials Performance magazine, both of which are member magazines of AMP. Today, we're chatting with Terry Greenfield, principal consultant at CONSULEX. Terry is a past chairman of AMP, a past president of NACE International, and he's also AMP's accredited representative to the International Maritime Organization, or IMO. In today's episode, with AMP having recently turned 5 years old, we're kicking off a Then and Now podcast series that we're going to be revisiting at times throughout the year. Now that we're in 2026, it has officially been 5 years since NACE and SSPC combined in 2021 to form AMP. So we're going to be looking back at how it all came to be, how things are going today, as well as what we can potentially do even better in the future. Terry, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. For anyone who isn't aware, you had a lot to do with the merger, and we'll be getting to that shortly, but let's start with just general introductions. I mentioned some of the highlights, but I know you can expand a little bit more. For anyone who is not familiar with your resume, Terry, what's your career arc been, and how would you, sum up your many decades in the corrosion industry?
Thanks, Ben. It's always good to be here. You know, it's interesting. They say that if you don't determine a future, your future will be determined for you. And I think that was kind of my role a little bit with NACE International. As I got involved and I have my brother to blame for certain aspects. He decided to be a contractor, and I had just completed my undergraduate work, and we had an offer to go to Europe to visit some friends, and I didn't have any money. So I went and helped Kyle on some contracting projects because we had always had our garage growing up was where everybody worked on their cars and all their projects, and we welded and painted and did all kinds of fun stuff. So that was kind of the initial drop into this industry. And as we kind of evolved, I continued to work with Kyle, and we became acquainted with NACE International through their involvement with the coating inspector program at Kennedy Space Center. And we both went through that program and ended up as a NACE level 3 certified coatings protector at the inspector at the time. And things kind of evolved from there. We developed that company, evolved into an engineering firm, and we did a lot of inspection. You know, today I kind of find myself more as a problem solver. You know, we looked at where things go wrong, which they happen a lot on a coatings project. Today, I've spent a lot of time in helping to remedy those situations. When things can't be remedied, I very often will support litigation as an expert witness. And so it kind of takes a long view, but I write specifications still, again, solve problems, provide litigation support, failure analysis, all those fun things, which are unfortunate considering I've spent most of my life also as an instructor in the CIP program, trying to show even beyond just the CIP program, but always trying to look at industry and provide to them the information they need to do it correctly and avoid failure. But unfortunately, we still have, not everybody learns quick enough. So hopefully that kind of gives a pretty good idea. And then as far as my technical background, and then I got involved at a level with the CIP program as a vice chair and then chair, and just kind of developed on within the officer role as treasurer and vice president and then president of NACE. And yep, we were there at the right time for the beginning of the merger.
So I want to take you back to 2021, and I guess the few years leading into that as well, because it's been 5 years since, I believe it was the first or second week of January when the announcement went live. We actually had you on this very podcast channel to break down how and why everything was occurring. But it's not as if we just rolled out of bed on New Year's Day or whatever the day was that we sent that announcement live and decided, oh, we're going to combine these two organizations. No, this had been months, if not years in the making. And you've told the story before of the big bump and how everything came together. And so, I'd love for you to tell that story again for anyone who doesn't recall that. But also, I would love to have you explain why this was the right time for the merger, because this whole concept of combining the NACE world and the SSPC world, this was not the first time that it had been explored. It's not like it was just a completely foreign concept, but for various reasons, it hadn't gotten to the finish line in the past. Whereas with you as a key figure, it did get to the finish line in 2021 and the months and years leading up to that. So explain, if you could, I guess, the big bump story, the origins for this round of talks, and why ultimately you think this was the right time in a way that, in years previous to that, maybe it wasn't.
It's interesting. It had been tried twice before, generally at about 10-year intervals, I think. I don't hold me to that as an exact number, but yeah, it never made it across the finish line. And I think what was different this time, you know, to set back just a moment, there was always, this murmurs and discussions of at conferences and different people going, God, the exhibitors had noted, boy, it sure would be great if this is a lot of the same audience. It would be great if you guys would get together and put on one show and even weren't even talking at that time of being combined organizations, but at least kind of doing a joint show to get a bigger group together of a lot of the same people. But we always did have these discussions with, various officers at the time, and there was always everyone saw the value, but no one ever really felt it could happen. I mean, I so many times people would go, "That'll never happen. It'll never happen," which is almost kind of like that's all you need to hear, right? Okay, well, let's make it happen. Well, here's kind of the big bump of itself, and again, some of this probably the reason it happened were all the right people together at the right time. I was president of, well, we kind of started when I was vice president and then rolled into the president role. It already had kind of been talking. And a gentleman named Joe Walker was coming in as president of SSPC at the time. And also his predecessor, Gary Manos, was the first one that we really had discussions with. But I think a lot of it, too, was Bob Chalker and Bill, the president, or I guess he was the executive director of SSPC, were all open to the discussions. So we kind of had the first discussion in Washington with that core group just to explore if it was possible. And then I think what was key here, too, is we got some help from some, outside consultants and things to help us look at the situation, what really needed to happen. We talked to some other association CEOs that had brought through organizations into, the merger status and were successful with it. So I think we really did a lot of background work and I don't say behind the scenes because everything was pretty transparent, but we did try to look at, what it would take to really make it work. So again, the credit goes to a lot of the officers and those that were involved at the time that saw the value in it and tried to come up with the formulation to make it happen. And I think that was really the key. I think, it's being, the right people in the right place at the right time was probably the most significant element where a high percentage of those people wanted to make it happen. We tried to really look at what the negative aspects were. People generally don't like change, right? The, we like our comfort zone, and this was definitely pushing a lot of people outside of their comfort zone.
When this first got off the ground in 2021, what were your thoughts at that time as far as the opportunities, which I know you touched on briefly, but also the challenges? When these announcements were first rolling out this time 5 years ago, what was the strategy? What did you see as, I guess, the key challenges to getting this thing off the ground, and then ultimately the opportunities if and when we did get it off the ground?
One of the things that I had done and shared and we all kind of built on was I put together kind of a comparative analysis of the two organizations and the products and services they provided. And I think there had always been although we overlapped in some areas, it wasn't as large an overlap as a lot of people thought. So there were a lot of complementary pieces. Like we did elements of worker training, but SSPC was very large into worker training as far as the technicians and certification of those processes. They had worked a lot too within, we had a successful but small entry into the certification of the contractors as well. And the organizations that done the work, while SSPC had a very large portion of that certification piece. So we saw that there was a very high complementary nature to the two organizations. And I think once that was realized, it helped kind of provide, the pathway to move it forward. But, as far as, the challenges in all cases, again, I'll get back to change. People are used to doing things a certain way, and there was two very different cultures, both positive, but different cultures within the two organizations. And, there was size difference. I think one of the key things that we took forward in that was the premise of a merger of equals. I think in scope of what could be provided to the industry, we were equals. In revenues, we weren't, but we didn't try to treat it as an acquisition, which I think was the fear in many of the previous attempts. We looked at this as how can these two groups looking at each other as equals, move this forward to provide, the best to the membership, the best to industry, and really have something positive and significant to come forward. So I think a lot of it was just that viewpoint. Again, the mantra was a merger of equals. And I think and the desire to do good things for the industry and to make impact with the industry, that we were equals in that respect. So I think that was a fundamental premise that we utilized because of that challenge, right? Of everyone's afraid they're going to lose something. Others will gain more. We really tried to keep that very focused and very equitable to both parties. I'll carry on to your second part of that question, though, was again, the opportunities were huge. And I think that's what we started to recognize as well, was that, working together, we could provide better products, better services, and really see a significant impact to the industry and in that new organization, from that new organization.
And spinning it forward to today, how would you assess how it's ultimately going? What are the things that as an association we're doing well? What are the things that we can do better? Just take us from 2021 to 2026. And, if you could share your perspective on how things are going today, perhaps relative to those early expectations.
It's an interesting piece because again, I was kind of, they have the 80-20 rule. I think sometimes in associations, there's a 90-10 rule. When you have a group of people together, 90% will find value. There's always going to be 10%, maybe less, but that see where it affected them in a way that wasn't positive. But I think we've overcome a lot of that. We're generally, and I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, but as the growth of the membership and the growth of the organization speak to that. So I think we're doing well. I think, we've seen the, growth, everything, post-COVID, COVID took a hit on everyone. I think we did very well together during COVID and post-COVID. And, there was some membership loss for the merger app, and especially not because of the merger, but just because of the nature of the environment, the business environment afterwards. What can we do better? And again, I'll say some things we did good, we'll talk about, like growth in membership, I think in a little bit, but I think what we can do better, that's an interesting piece, because I get back to that 10%, ultimately addressing some of those issues that can be remedied and done better. I don't know. You hear rumbling sometimes with, again, those that aren't happy because of some membership aspects and how their particular segment is served within the organization now. I think what we can do better is really trying to identify. I don't know the exact elements. I do know we have a very good CEO that's looking at that. Alan does a great job in trying to evaluate where those potential opportunities are to do better. And I think I can't speak to the specifics of those, but there's always things we can do better and within the opportunity for the membership. I think one of the big ones was going back that made a lot of folks happy was making the standards available to the members again. That had been apparently a sore spot, and I think was remedied and addressed a lot of those concerns, and I think has moved us better in that respect. So I think it hits, to answer the question probably, the most succinctly is to say that we are, when those issues are addressed, we recognize, anything that isn't being done well is an opportunity to do better. And I think there's an active search for those opportunities, and I think we are addressing them. And the standards was an example of that. We did, as an organization, come back and make those available again as part of their membership package. And I think we keep membership, very affordable as well, which creates greater opportunities for growth.
You mentioned the membership growth, and it gives me great pride to announce that AMP recently crossed the 40,000 member milestone. We put that announcement out in the first week of the new year, so there's no better way, in my opinion, to start off an anniversary year than by celebrating a milestone such as that. For you, Terry, as someone that was involved in the early stages of putting this together, does that give you a sense of pride to see that growth out of, I'm not going to say it's entirely because of the merger, but certainly the combined resources of NACE and SSPC under the AMP umbrella allow us to serve an even wider audience. And within that growth, are there any specific areas that stand out to you as perhaps seeing the most engagement?
Yeah, I don't know if I can zero in on a specific segment. I do know that we're seeing, let's see, I think we added 30 chapters in 2024 and 30 chapters in 2025, and I think a lot of them are international as well. So I think the segment, we always, the name NACE International had the connotation of being international, but we were definitely more of a U.S.-based company reaching out. I think we're really starting to move into being an international organization. And I think the growth that we're seeing internationally, but I don't know it's so much by an industry segment as it is by demographics within the international world that we're actually making headway there and seeing growth in that aspect.
Well, and when it comes to specific segments, I think at least one example, and I don't want to say it's the only source of growth, but one example of an area where there has been growth is in maritime, which has become a focal point for the organization. And Terry, you're someone that has extensive maritime expertise, as we were explaining leading off the pod. AMP in recent months has made several announcements as to agreements that the organization is now entering into as far as collaboration. We've got the inaugural Maritime Coatings Contractor Forum coming up in February. If you're following what's going on at AMP, you know that maritime is a big point of emphasis for this organization. So for someone such as yourself that has a lot of expertise in that field, what stands out to you about what AMP is doing in that arena, and perhaps what is it doing under the AMP umbrella that maybe would have been more difficult to do as NACE or SSPC separately?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Parts of it are easy. As far as if it was a separate organizations, that was a little tougher, but I'll attempt it. But first, to go back, we see the growth in the U.S., right, with a refocus on maritime and shipbuilding, and I think we're supporting that very well. I do know that we're now establishing a lot of international cooperation with groups that are, the associations for the owners as well as the shipbuilders. So we're really, instead of being on the outside, we're getting deeper and deeper into the inside where we can provide, the expertise. And to sidetrack for just a moment, a lot of that serves the membership as well, right? Because of the different, whether they're manufacturers or contractors or engineers and inspectors, whatever it is, those services become more valuable as the, world within maritime becomes more aware of what AMP provides. Within the IMO, we've been a member for quite a while, but we've really been engaging this last year. And we're seeing that participation now within AMP on other association working groups and task groups, and trying to share a lot of the technical background. And I think we've had a couple meetings where it's becoming, the goal is to have the industry, the maritime industry, look to AMP and its members who provide a lot of the services for the expertise they need in solving problems. And I think that's where we're seeing, genesis isn't the right word, but we're definitely, people have always been aware, but they were only aware of what AMP did based on what they had utilized AMP for. So now we're really trying to promote the full breadth of what AMP offers within products and services in the corrosion world. So often the issues that one industry faces, they think are new and unique to them. And the reality is they're not necessarily unique. In some version, they're prevalent in other industries, and maybe those other industries now have lessons learned that they can share with another industry that's just starting to realize what some of those problems are. So I think we're really on a good growth pattern towards more awareness of what AMP and its membership can provide to the marine industry, and again, as well as other industries, but just specific to marine. So again, it's a collaboration with other associations and different working groups from those associations that work towards solving these problems that AMP is now participating in. So I think that's a significant positive growth element within the organization.
Looking ahead to the next 5 years, what are your expectations? From your perspective, what are the areas that AMP should emphasize or target? And when I ask this question, I don't necessarily mean just within maritime. I'm speaking to the association as a whole. We've talked about a lot of the things that we've done within the last 5 years. So what do you think we should be looking at doing over the next 5 years?
We always look at some of the industries where we had our original growth, oil and gas, pipeline. Those are still big, and we're still supporting those. And I think we're trying to look at how to support them better. I think, we talked about maritime extensively. Don't need to talk any more about that. I think there's even the element too of within municipalities and water systems and a lot of things that we've touched on and been involved in. But I think, I'm sure I haven't seen it. I'm not quite as dialed into a lot of the overall AMP initiatives that I would have been at one time, but I know they're looking at those. And I think that's where we're going to find, the opportunity for growth is to continue to develop the customers that know what you have and how they use you, and then help develop further that potential education, whatever it may be. But I think a lot of it now is also looking at where there's industries that need the type of services and products and help that AMP can provide, and starting to target those. And I think that'll happen. Again, I really do believe we've got great leadership right now and are trying to further develop where those opportunities are. I think we're going to see a lot of growth over the next 5 years. I think we're going to be maybe surprised at how fast we're going to see AMP grow to a much more substantial and influential organization.
You mentioned earlier that when it came to getting this merger off the ground and ultimately the success of the first 5 years, it came down to having the right people at the right time. So, Terry, if someone listening to this podcast wants to be involved in the next 5 years or years beyond that and be one of those leadership figures that hopefully is the right person at the right time, how would you recommend they start that? Beyond your own success in the industry, we mentioned leading off the pod, your incredible contributions over the years to the associations. For anyone listening that might want to take on a leadership role and help steer this association in the years ahead, how would you suggest they start? Obviously, AMP 2026 is coming up in a couple of months in Houston. That's one opportunity to, be in the right places, talk to the right people. Just with the benefit of your experience, what would you tell someone that's listening to this that might be inspired to, take action and get more involved at a leadership level in the coming years?
My suggestion would be look to your local chapters and get involved there first. There's lots of opportunities and there's a great need, that, and at the local level, it allows you to kind of see kind of the basic workings, get involved in the process, the interaction with others. And then, as you move up in conference, it's always, I'm going to phrase this the right way too. Some of the best times by your activities in the local chapters, you're going to get recognized for leadership. And there will be those that help help mentor you through the process. There is, a leadership development committee that is there that's always trying to look and find that talent. And I think that's, at a conference you can find that, or you can But the people at the local level are the ones that are going to help you keep moving through the process. Everybody, I don't recommend setting your goals on being chair right away. Okay. And you're going to find, and I guess this is going to be, I want to be careful how I say this. Sometimes it's not you shouldn't set the goal to be the chair. You should set the goal to improve and help the organization. That should be your goal. And start at the local level. And as you work up, you'll be recognized. Okay. And then it's where it's the ask of, how about consider serving on the board, consider, at that point, potentially moving into the officer role. So it's kind of there's no shortcut, but the most important thing is to have the desire to serve and learn to lead. Not everyone's born a great leader. So a lot of people have to learn to lead, which is okay. Sometimes that's the best route. But I think that's the key, is just get involved. Get involved, see if it's something you really want to do, and be willing to, this is one of those things, the compensation for serving within AMP. Yeah, you may meet, the networking and the contacts you meet, there may be some business relationships that are developed that are beneficial to your company and definitely your career. But the biggest piece and the focus needs to be, what can you do for the association to make the association better? Okay, how can you help? And then you keep moving forward, and someone will recognize you, and you will be asked to do more. And be careful, because if you really enjoy doing it and you do it well, you may get asked to do a lot. You have to be, prepared. But I think that's where you start. You start with a desire to serve and a desire to be beneficial and make an impact in a positive way. And I think if you have that and you start at the local level, you'll get recognized, and you'll be mentored, and you'll be helped to move up to where you can make more significant impact and have a larger role.
And Terry, if anyone listening wants to pick your brain more specifically, I know they can find you on LinkedIn, and I'm guessing you're going to be at a few AMP events coming up, correct?
I will. I'll be at the Marine event in Norfolk, and I will be obviously at conference.
Terry, that was really great insight. Appreciate you kicking off this Then and Now podcast series on the AMP 5-year anniversary. I can think of no one more fitting, given your role in putting this great organization together. Terry, appreciate you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure, Ben. Please take care.
That is Terry Greenfield, and with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. On behalf of AMP, I'm Ben Dubose, and if you want more resources from us or our publications within the association, just visit amp.org, coatingsformag.com, or materialsperformance.com. You can also check out our social media pages on basically every major outlet. Same with podcast platforms. Just search for AMP or your publication of choice.